Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SALT Talks. My name is John Darcy. I'm the managing director of SALT, which is a global thought leadership forum at the intersection of finance, technology, and public policy. These SALT Talks are a series of digital interviews we've been doing during the work from home period to sort of replicate what we do at our SALT conference, which I know one of our guests today was at our SALT conference in 2019. What we really try to do is provide a window for our audience into the minds of subject matter experts, as well as provide a platform for big, important ideas that we think are shaping the future of the world. We're very excited today to bring a very relevant and topical discussion to you today with two of the great American mayors and two African-American mayors who have been pioneers in their communities and have definitely been leaders in tackling some of the issues of racial inequality and social activism that we're facing today. So those two guests that we're very thrilled to be welcoming today are Mayor Stephen K. Benjamin of Columbia, South Carolina, and Mayor Michael D. Tubbs of Stockton, California. And I'll introduce you to the bios of these two great mayors before Anthony allows them to dive deeper into their backgrounds. But Mayor Benjamin has been the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina since July of 2010. He's the first African-American mayor of that city in the city's history. And before serving as mayor, he worked in the Columbia area as an attorney and served on various charitable organizations. Mayor Benjamin previously served as the 76th president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So he's a leader within the mayoral community in the United States. Mayor Benjamin is, I would say, better half, but as Anthony would say, better 9/10. His wife is the Honorable DeAndrea Gist Benjamin, a judge in the South Carolina's 5th Judicial District. Together, they have two beautiful daughters, and he graduated with a BA and a JD from the University of South Carolina, where he served as the undergraduate student body president during his time as an undergraduate and as the Student Bar Association president during his time at the USC Law School. So we're very thrilled to be welcoming Mayor Benjamin today to SALT Talks. Our second guest is Mayor Michael D. Tubbs, who is the mayor of Stockton, California. Michael is 29 years old. He's the youngest mayor in the United States. Upon taking office in January of 2017, he both became Stockton's youngest mayor and the city's first African-American mayor, so he was a pioneer in multiple ways. Michael is also the youngest mayor, as I mentioned, in the history of the country, representing a city with a population of over 100,000 residents. Before becoming mayor, Michael served as Stockton's District 6 city council member, where he was elected at the age of 22 in 2013, and he became one of the youngest city council members in the country at that time. He was included in Fortune magazine's 2018 Top 40 Under 40 and Forbes magazine's 2018 list of 30 Under 30. He graduated in 2012 from Stanford University with a bachelor's and master's degree with honors. He's been a college course instructor for the Aspire Public Schools and a fellow at the Stanford Institute of Design and the Emerson Collective. He's a Stockton native and a proud product of the Stockton public school system. So we want to thank Mayor Michael Tubbs and Mayor Stephen Benjamin for joining us on the talk today. Conducting the interview will be Anthony Scaramucci, who is the founder and managing partner of Skybridge Capital, which is a global alternative investment firm, as well as the chairman of SALT, which you all know because you're here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Anthony for the interview. Reminder, if you have any questions for Mayor Tubbs or Mayor Benjamin, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your video screen. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anthony.
All right, John, thank you very much. Both of you mayors, thank you so much for being on with us. A couple of weeks ago, I saw a cartoon in the New Yorker, and I thought it summed up our times. It was a picture of an anchor person at a desk, and they basically said, well, we just heard the weather from the Democratic weatherman. Now let's get the weather from the Republican one. And the point being is that we're now arguing over the facts. And so our civil debate has gone awry because we can't even stipulate what the facts are in our society anymore. And I thought it was a very interesting point as we start to segment, and you can see it in relative civil strife that's going on in the country. And so my first question, and I'll start with you, Mayor Benjamin, and then maybe Mayor Tubbs can answer it afterwards, and then we can just have a free-flowing conversation. But my question is, what are the facts right now? And where do you see the facts in terms of our society, and where do you think the society needs to go to heal itself?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Darcy, for reading my intro just like I wrote it. I always appreciate that.
Your mother wrote that, Mayor. Who's kidding who? I mean, that was unbelievable.
It'd be 20 pages long. 20 pages long if my mama wrote it. The facts are we are dealing with the greatest public health crisis pandemic since 1918. That we are dealing with an incredibly inconsistent economy. The first quarter we saw probably the greatest economic disruption since 1932, and right now on the streets of America we're hearing incredible amounts of pain and passion, unlike anything we've seen nationally since 1968, all wrapped up into a couple of months. And at the top of the food chain, at the head of this $23 trillion GDP, that this past quarter we saw the national debt go up significantly, watch GDP drop, about 5% or so. We have political dissension, disruption. We're in an amazingly challenging place where I believe it's time for us to have leaders and realize that, at least as it relates to those of us who are proud Americans who recognize the challenges we face in this country for hundreds of years, working to become that more perfect union, that there's no red way or blue way, that at the very least, let's try and focus on a red, white, and blue approach to building that more perfect union. The reality is that each and every one of us, and I will tell you, that's probably, and I'll talk more about it later, that's probably the silver lining of all the things that we're going through, is that it has activated so many folks to realize their individual responsibility, that the government shouldn't solve, it can't solve all your problems, public health professionals can't, the business community can't, that philanthropy can't do it all, that really we all have an individual role to step up and create this world in which we want to live. We want to make sure our parents get their due, but even more importantly, making sure we're creating a world where people like my daughters and Michael's beautiful young son can really have the opportunity to live up to their God-given potential. So I think it's a time for leaders. I mean, it's probably it's certainly easily the most challenging time I've faced in my many years in government and public service at different levels. But we're up to the task. I feel strongly that America's mayors are leading from the front and will continue to do so.
Mayor Tubbs.
Well, first, let me say it's always good to be on with Mayor Benjamin, who started his term as mayor when I was still a college student. So I'm thankful you're still in this fight.
Rubbing it in, man. Rubbing it in, Mayor. Go ahead.
Hey, Jay.
All right. I'm bringing out the brine. You're rubbing it in. That's going to be one of my questions for you, Mayor Tubbs. How did you accomplish so much? If you added my lifetime with Steve's lifetime and you divide it by 2, we're barely you. So we're just trying to figure out how you got to where you are. But
sorry,
go ahead, keep going, Mayor.
But to answer the question, I think in terms of what's true, what's been kind of the silver lining for me is understanding this moment we're in with the greatest global health crisis, as the mayor mentioned, but also the conversation we're having about not just police brutality, but really about equality under the law, has been a 400-year conversation in this country. So I think the fact is we've had this conversation before. I think just given the cascading impacts of COVID-19 and now the civil unrest, that it's time for us to really solve these issues. The facts are, regardless as to how we feel, where we consume news, or what we like the world to be, there's institutionalized racism in our country. If you look at everything from who gets loans, to how toddlers are treated in preschool, to how discipline is done in elementary school, to like in every institution, not just policing, there's racial bias. And I think what I've been most heartened about is I'm hearing people who are Republican and Democrats coming to the point like this is not made up, this is true. And let's figure out how do we get towards a solution. I think the fact also is that now is a time for real patriots, as Mayor Benjamin said, for people who really believe in what we wrote in that Constitution, that we want to form a union with where all people are created equal and are entitled and able to pursue life, liberty, and pursue their happiness, that we believe in equality under the law for everybody in our country. And it's great rhetoric. We've seen over the past 400 years, it's hard to put in practice, but I think this moment demands that we push further and push farther to get there.
Well, I 100% believe that there's institutional racism. And just a quick story. I'm at Harvard Law School my first semester. There are 3 African-American students, male students in my section. they're walking on Massachusetts Avenue to a convenience store after 11 o'clock at night, and they're arrested by the Cambridge police. I mean, and literally all they were doing was going to get a cup of coffee, and they blah, blah, blah ensued. 30 years later, there was another incident just like that in Cambridge. And remember, President Obama got involved in it. And so I remember thinking about tying those two things together. I said, my God, there is absolutely institutional racism. So it's a question for both of you. What do you say to those people that say that there isn't institutional racism? I mean, how do you, this is my point about facts. I mean, how do you debate somebody? Well, sir, do you think there's institutional racism? No, I don't think there is. How do you go about it? How do you debate it?
Well, I would encourage folks to, those who care about their country, and often profess it in different ways, often politically, to really take these opportunities to listen. My grandma would say that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should listen twice as much as you talk. And right now, I will tell you that the most edifying and powerful conversations I've had with people young enough to be my son, like Mayor Tubbs and others, is I went out and I obviously I spend a lot of time. I have a background in law enforcement, so I spend a lot of time with our officers. But I also get out into the streets and sit down with the protesters, social distance, wearing a mask, the whole 9 yards. But I don't get there and tell them about all the things that we're doing, all the things the government's doing to make their world better. I just sat there and asked them, tell me your stories. I want to hear your stories. And if you listen to what's happening in the world right now, so those classmates of yours from 30 years ago, and seeing the same things happening 30 years later, and I assure you, 30 years before that, it was actually the law of the land, and 30 years before that, the fact that structural racism, differential access to goods and services is real in America, and that we know personally mediated racism, unconscious bias acted on by those of us who in power, is also real. And there's also internalized racism. I mean, the challenges that we may face as individuals. And it is very difficult. We were chatting a little bit earlier. It's tough when you have to debate facts with people now, and how at least back in the day you could at least rely on data, and data would maybe solve an argument, or maybe you could get people to focus on commerce and economy. Let's at least make sure we prosper together. And it seems like right now the conversation is just awry, and that's why it's so important for leaders on the national level, state level, local level, but those we're talking about intersectoral leadership, not just the public sector, really find ways to bring people together. So at least we're listening to each other. But it may be the challenge of our times.
Yeah, well, I as the mayor said, I think I'm at the point now where if it was really about sort of data driving actions and decision making, we would just live in a fundamentally different world. I just read something yesterday that said the median wealth of a Black family with a college degree is only 70% of the median wealth of a white family with just a high school diploma. And stats like that to me just really illustrate it's not about just the actions people are taking. It's not about people not having education. It's not about people not working hard. It's something that's systematic and it's insidious, but it's also literally in every institution. If I had time, we could go through every institution from the banking system to the school system to the prison system, that if the outcomes are the same, then the discussion has to be, do we really think there's something inferior about Black people that leads to these outcomes? Or is there something that's being done, right? And I think that's the conversation we have to have. And what I found, like Mayor Benjamin, in talking with people, that sometimes the data has to be connected with a story, and a story of someone, if people don't know that they see, touch, feel. So I know when I talk about how, even as mayor, when I go take a run at the local university, half a mile from my house, each and every time I'm greeted with campus security who are circling because they don't realize I'm the mayor. And when they do, they wave and drive off. While my friends who aren't Black, when they go around the campus, they never see campus police. I know, and just in sharing those stories, I think it's allowing people to realize that wow, I had one conversation with some folks in the community. I said, no, I get it. Like, the institutions have worked for you and your family. You've seen it work. You guys have made something. I get that. but those same institutions don't work in that way for my family. And when I said it like that, I saw something click, like, oh, wow. Because I think part of it is allowing people to understand that your experience in America, your experience with police, your experience with schools, your experience with banks, your experience with luck is not a universal experience. And that there's other experience that make your experience less, but your experience is not the only truth. So I think that's part of it. And I think it's also having tough conversations like this that are frank and that are honest and are done in a way that has multiple races talking. Because I was telling people in Stockton last week, if it was up to Black people to solve racism, institutional racism, it would have been solved. We've been saying for 400 years, this ain't right. We got to do something about it. So it's going to take kind of allyships and good people who are saying, you know what, we want everyone to have universal human dignity. And it's not easy. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's something that I would argue is very necessary.
Mayor Tubbs, do you think something has changed? I'll ask Mayor Benjamin the same question, but the proliferation of the iPhone or the smartphone, where now we're on top of each other, and unfortunately we witnessed the horrific 8 minutes and 46 seconds or other situations, the one in Atlanta. Do you think something has changed now where now it is so frontal and it's in everybody's faces that it's going to cause a spiritual awakening and that could cause an even bigger evolution? Or do you think we're just going to get more of the same?
No, I would say we can't do more of the same. It feels different. The protests feel different. The civil unrest feels different. And even the actions from people who I wouldn't think would even see the need to change, at least locally, have been different. And I think part of it is sort of the iPhone, but I think part of it's what you and Mayor Benjamin mentioned when we started. It's the fact that COVID-19 has everyone shook and everyone anxious and everyone insecure and almost a shared sense of national suffering.
There's no racial bias in COVID-19, although we have learned that certain communities have more proliferation of it, but all of us have the same DNA, right? So
yeah, well,
we're all at risk. We're all at risk.
And I think what's been fascinating about that, we're seeing this disease, which is not racist, it's a disease, a virus, but we see how because of racist systems, that's attacked, like some people have worse outcomes. So I think that started the conversation. Yeah, people are home, people are economically anxious, people are stressed, and people are tuned in. People are really deeply engaged in what's happening. And I think seeing that was just like the straw that broke the camel's back. So I think it's a mixture of the iPhone, but I mean, we saw Michael Brown on the iPhone. We saw Sandra Bland be pulled over on the iPhone. Hell, Emmett Till had an open casket funeral. So it's not the first time we've seen sort of suffering in this way, but I think it's the time in terms of a time of great transition and anxiety in this country where people are saying, what's next, what's better? You have the election coming up in November. I think all these things have created the conditions upon which this really sparked a real movement and a real reckoning.
Is it different, Mayor
No,
Benjamin?
I couldn't agree more. I do believe, obviously, I think the last time I was at SALT with you, Anthony, when we were talking about just how rapidly technology is changing the world. Michael and I have done conversations on AI and automation and advanced machine learning and how it was changing the future of work and how that would disparately impact these various communities. Now, it also happen now to be the same essential workers that can't socially distance, that can't remote work, that don't have access to PPE. And certainly as we adjust to the new normal, as we work our way through the pandemic, everyone's, like Michael said, at home watching TV. And it was, I'm not giving much to hyperbole, but it was the very first time that millions of Americans and billions across the world were forced to watch an 8 minute and 46 second public execution, a state-sponsored public execution. And I think it fundamentally broke people's hearts. It fundamentally changed the way that people saw the reality. It humanized that data that Michael was talking about earlier. It put a story, a real narrative on everyone's mind that said, no, I've heard the stories. I didn't really believe all the facts behind Trayvon, the imagery and the Rodney King thing. I'm sure about that. Michael Brown, I don't know his history, and I don't know, what happened in this story or that story, and the millions of stories that particularly millennials have really Michael's generation and the Zoomers now have really been sharing. But everyone was forced to watch a man rendered helpless, die before our eyes. And I think it broke America's heart, and it spurred this energy that now I think if our job as leaders in our different spheres is again, how do you get that pain and that passion and turn into progress? How do you utilize our democratic institutions, which are not all government, and channel it in a way that you can get real immediate change going in the right direction that gets us past bumper sticker responses, like if it's a defund the police, whatever happens to answer. What does that really mean to people? Are we talking about finding different ways to invest in actually creating just communities? So that's where the leaders step in and you bottle up all that, all everything happened in this moment, and really turn into a real movement that moves the country forward.
I'm going to kick it over to John Dorsey. He's got a few questions from our audience, Mayor, but I do agree that hopefully this is a seminal moment for all of us where we'll start more healing. But John, go ahead. I know you have a question for both mayors.
Yeah, I know, Mayor Tubbs, you alluded to the fact that, Black people have been talking about these issues for 400 years. And certainly, a lot of people are now talking about police reform and changing policing tactics as a result of sort of the social unrest that we've seen. And then I want to direct this question at Mayor Benjamin. In 2014, you introduced an initiative called Justice for All, which was implemented new training, competitive pay, diverse representation, and different elements of community engagement to strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and the communities in which they serve. And I think in general, policing is just one element of institutional racism for sure, but also within policing, it's not just the idea that we shouldn't be violently confronting situations that don't need to be violently confronted, but it's just about the relationship between the police and the communities in which they serve. How do we need to rethink in general policing in this country? Racism is one element of it, but just in terms of how they engage with their constituents.
Sure. No, thank you. As a city and as a police department, we have a fantastic chief of police. We gravitated rapidly towards President Obama's leadership on 21st century policing, recognizing that these generational challenges have existed between law enforcement, the men and women who run towards danger when we're running the other direction, and the communities that they serve, particularly communities of color. So we formulated Justice for All using a number of the principles of his 21st century policing initiative, and decided that we would build a department that was focused on first transparency, because that's always been an issue, and on accountability and working to build trust. So we had to completely revamp the way in which we recruited and trained our officers. We put our president of our Columbia Urban League on our hiring board, and 2 years later, 68% of our new hires were African American, Latino, Asian, and female, trying to get a force that looked more like the city. We put in incentives for our officers to advance in their education and the things that we valued. Obviously, we put in bonuses in place for them to meet those measurements. We also put a hiring bonus and also a residency bonus in place. So an officer who wants to move into a home in our city, because it's important that there be some type of an emotional connection between those officers and the communities they serve, that an officer can move into a home, no down payment, low interest rate, 30-year. It's a really creative program that we modified to meet our officers. But we also went 100% body cam. We started recording video and audio recording of interviews of those charged with violent crimes, and then using data, trying to humanize that data to share information on use of force, and how if there's a police-involved shooting, how it's independently investigated. So all, again, to try and change the framework in a way that's systemic, that whether Mayor Benjamin was there or Chief Holbrook was there, these gains would be sustained over a period of time. And I say all that to say, John, that even those things that we did in the wake of Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, still not enough right now. We're right now, we're at a moment where we're not talking only about reinventing policing as we know it, but even reimagining it. Reimagining how you provide for safer communities. Michael, quoting Mahatma Gandhi, talks about poverty being a form of violence, and other ways in which you can rebuild communities. And maybe even, yes, we had cops right now, guys, overworked and underpaid. Because they're doing everything. We're asking them to be mental health counselors, asking them to be social workers. We're asking them to be, all these things that go beyond being guardian or warrior that they ought not be doing. Really train them to make sure that they're well-rounded, have a skill set, but that's not their job. And we've got to find ways to create safer communities so that when you have an issue that's a humble or not a real public safety threat, you don't need strangers with guns showing up, regardless as to how altruistic they are. So we made some strides then in 2014, but right now we're at a point where we're even reimagining the role of our law enforcers and our role in helping create healthier, stronger, more vibrant and equitable communities.
Thank you, Mayor Benjamin. I want to direct a follow-up to Mayor Tubbs. You touched a little bit on incentivizing educational growth within the police force. Mayor Tubbs, I know you've done a lot of things in terms of trying to promote education within Stockton. Obviously, you prioritize education from a young age. You're a graduate of Stanford University with honors. You secured over $20 million in philanthropic capital for Stockton Scholars, which is a program that you aim to triple the number of Stockton students graduating from college. How do we level the playing field in terms of public education in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I appreciate you asking that, because this moment, I think the policing conversation that we're having nationally is just symptomatic of a wider conversation that includes things like education. So I think to level the education playing field, all the research says it really starts at 0 to 3. So like Mayor Benjamin said, like poverty is a great indicator of educational attainment. So doing everything we can to prevent families from being in poverty or helping families who are in poverty leave poverty. All the research tells us that between 0 and 3, children do word acquisition and acquire language, and that has a big impact. And also in terms of adverse childhood experiences. So I think using, again, data about how adverse childhood experiences or childhood trauma impact brain development, which impacts academic success, and doing what we can in terms of intervention. So it looks like what they have in Providence, Rhode Island, where they have social workers and other people work with families to make sure kids are reading and hearing enough words. It means policy like paid family leave and things of that sort, so parents can actually be home with their children and help to be their first educators. It means things like universal preschool. But I think also if you look at the data tells us that kids of color are more likely to go to schools with the least qualified teachers and the least funding, which seems like it should be the opposite, particularly if we're talking about parity. So I think it's also looking at in terms of how do you make sure that every child in every school has a qualified teacher in the classroom who's well-trained and well-resourced. How do you make sure that they have curriculum and education? And I think part of it starts with, again, at a national level, Supreme Court edict around making education a fundamental right. Because in this country, based off the San Antonio case in 1973, education is not even a right for American citizens. So I think it starts from there. And then once it becomes codified as a right, then we can have the conversation about how do you make sure that that zip code doesn't correlate with destiny, that schools aren't funded solely based off property taxes, that the least qualified, the least experienced, the non-credentialed teachers are teaching the kids who are starting out a little bit more behind. But how do we reverse that? So again, big issue, but there are like data-driven solutions that aren't necessarily easy, but are necessary if we're truly serious about using education as a lever to help equal the playing field.
Yeah, you touched on the fact that education and policing are somewhat intertwined, and I think all of these issues relating to institutional racism are somewhat intertwined. And I want to direct this question at Mayor Benjamin. At 29 years old, it was 1999, Governor Jim Hodges appointed you as to the cabinet as director of the state's second largest law enforcement agency. It was the Department of Probation, Parole, and Pardon Services. So as it relates to criminal justice reform, going beyond policing, what effect does it have in African-American communities and minority communities when we're putting people in jail for nonviolent crimes, when children in the African-American community are growing up, without fathers in the home sometimes? How do we change that system to break this cycle of poverty and this cycle as it relates to, poor education circumstances within the African-American community?
Well, I think obviously just the fact that you're asking the question is a wonderful step forward. So many folks have refused to connect the dots of what the effect of long-term policy decisions, the fact that we spend $200 billion a year on police and prosecutors and prisons, and we've been able to profit because of a number of these industries. I literally just took a call from Governor Hodges, who 20 years later he still thinks I work for him, and some of you may know him. He's my dear friend and been a great mentor. But he gave me an opportunity as a very young individual to step into a place. I've been prepared as a political science major, as a young lawyer, very altruistic, and had all these ideas about these theories I'd learned to actually put them into action. Running our state's second largest law enforcement agency, and be able to show people that you can actually create safe communities. We were unrepentant about making sure that people are held accountable, particularly those that had been engaged in violent crimes. But at the very same time that we had to make sure people were able to reintegrate into society and give them a chance to live up to their God-given potential. So we worked with the NAACP and others to get people re-registered to vote. We were required we established some programs that actually brought people back into the American economic mainstream, gave them jobs, and it was a wonderful opportunity to do so. But I think the basis of your question is also the answer to your question, recognizing that each of these things are inextricably interlinked, and that we are all connected, and relationships are interdependent. And so that in order to deal with these things, it's going to take investment. It's going to take thoughtful policy. That policy is going to have to be humanized and compassionate, but very intentional. I think. And realize that some of these solutions are not going to happen overnight. That it took us literally several centuries to get here. So it's going to take us time to turn the corner. But there are some things that we can do today, right now, to start building on those communities. And I would tell you, just as you know, I've spent a lot of my time in elementary schools, even since my children left elementary school. I've been in over 300 different classrooms since I started my term as mayor. I love being around children, and I love being around senior citizens. Everybody in between I can take or give on any given day. But when you're around these children, particularly as Michael said, when they're very young, you can see the hope and aspiration and the promise and the gifts. When the kids aren't the little boys aren't too old, they still want to hug you and grab you and tell you how awesome you are and how proud they are. You look at the face of this African American man, and they're still trying to figure out how in the world did you become the mayor of our city. It is a special time, and then we allow them to lose that because they're dealing with issues that I didn't have to deal with as a child. I never had to worry about safety or security or shelter. I didn't have to. We lived in a rough neighborhood, but a very stable household with a dad who woke up in the morning early, didn't leave the house like give me a kiss, and came home late at night after his third job sometimes, and had hugs, and we stood up late at night and watched the honeymoon together. And a mother who complimented him and made him a much better man. They're still together after 54 years. He still bossed me around too. But every child didn't have that. So then you have to step up and say, so what's the role of a civilized society? What's the role of a loving and compassionate community to stand in the gap and put as best as we can the structures in place to make sure this kid gets the same shot he has? These children nowadays, I will tell you, are much more talented, much more intelligent, digital native than Steve Benjamin ever was. So it's my job to give them a shot, and that's what I'm gonna do.
Next question before I let Anthony get back in here. I'm having too much fun engaging with you guys on this, but you guys have both been very focused on job creation and economic empowerment as tools to help lift your constituents out of poverty and create more equal outcomes. So Mayor Benjamin, in your first term alone, you cut the unemployment rate in half in your metropolitan area. What are examples of programs either that we're doing today that you think we should ramp up and increasingly focus on? One example being opportunity zones, which I know you guys have both been involved with, but what are other types of programs? And as an example for Mayor Tubbs, you've been involved at the municipal level in one of the first pilot programs for a version of universal basic income. It's in Stockton. It's called SEED. So I'll let Mayor Tubbs, you start with this. What are specific economic programs that we need to focus on and need to ramp up in order to create sort of a domestic Marshall Plan to help create more equal outcomes?
Great question. Number one, I think in terms of opportunity zones, part of the issues in California, there's not yet tax conformity with kind of state and federal taxes. So it's been hard to marshal interest. And I think also just having a version 2.0 that's actually more tailored to real underserved communities, I think would be a big benefit in terms of using capital and free enterprise as a way to lift votes. In terms of the basic income demonstration, one of the things I've been most surprised about is how money is a function of time. So what we've seen is that with the $500, we just allow people to have more agency over their time. So there's folks like a gentleman named Tomas who talks about how the first $500 a month was enough for him to interview for a job. And I asked him, like, what does that mean? And he said, well, I work retail. And because I work retail, I'm not able to have like a set schedule. I don't have paid time off. I have 2 kids, so I can't take a risk and bet on myself and be entrepreneurial, because doing so may mean the rent's not paid for this month. And I don't have a rich dad. I don't have a real safety net to follow. I am the safety net. And he said the $500 was enough for him to take 2 days off work to interview. And he ended up getting a better job with more pay, benefits, unionized, et cetera. And for me, that story is just telling, because I think when I think about sort of a basic income or income floor, I think about sort of our society being an angel investor in all of us and saying that, hey, we can't control who your parents are. We can't control the circumstances of your birth. But what we can do is make sure you have a shot, that you have some sort of underpinning, you have some sort of foundation that then you can put your feet down and buy boots and buy shoestrings to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So I definitely think part of this conversation has to have some sort of an income floor for everyone, particularly when we consider the unequal places where people start. There's another program or series of programs I like to see ramped up are really just policy discussions. We know that minimum wage has not kept up with the cost of living. We know that in 99% of counties in this country, you cannot afford housing with the current minimum wage, which means we have to lift the floor. We have to increase wages so that when people are working, they're actually working and able to provide and pay. It makes no sense to have people working 2 or 3 jobs and still not be able to pay for basic necessities. And then I think that the third thing, particularly around conversations we're having just about kind of job guarantees, which I think make a lot of sense. But also we have to have, if you look at what Mayor Bloomberg proposed in his campaign with the Greenwood Initiative, just real targeted, specific loan programs, capacity building programs for entrepreneurs. I think going to Stanford, being in Silicon Valley, there's a caricature of what an entrepreneur is, but the most entrepreneurial people I've ever met are the people in my neighborhoods in Stockton who are selling tamales or selling things that are now legal that once were illegal, but who have shown a business acumen in mind and just don't have access to capital, don't have access to the teaching, but have the same grit, resilience, creativity, ingenuity that my classmates at Stanford have. So I do think kind of targeted investments towards investing in supporting entrepreneurs in communities that have been particularly impacted by police violence and other forms of violence like poverty would also make a big difference.
Mayor Benjamin, do you have anything to add to that?
Just very quickly, I know we're running short on time. We tried to lead from the front and lead by example. Our city is a unique place, state government, largest army training base in the world, universities and colleges. So a significant amount of our property is not in tax rolls. So we're always working with a limited amount of resources. So it was important to me as a commercial interest carry a significant share of the tax burden to run just a tight ship. We finished 8 of the last 10 years of the budget surplus, never raised taxes. We've actually cut taxes by 12 mils. We've been creating an environment where private sector capital feels welcome. It hits the ground, you treat it well, and we've been able to welcome billions of dollars of capital investment into our city. We invest in our city, $750 million in water, sewer, and stormwater investments, and the work that Michael's talking about, collective leadership on opportunity zones. We try to make sure that when we make those investments, that we ask of our partners, and we dig deep into the community to make sure these jobs are available to folks who live and make the community special. There are a number of great efforts out there around the UBI that Michael's been leading on. Been doing some work with the Aspen Institute around income volatility and ways in which we can just help people stabilize. We developed a wonderful program a few years ago called Work It Up, in which you go to one side of town and employers say they can't find employees, and you go to the other side of town and people say they can't find jobs. And it's your job to be an ambassador and try and connect those dots, making sure people have the skill set, but employers understand they're not going to get perfect individuals who, in my faith tradition, only one perfect person's ever walked the face of the earth, and he's not here right now. Well, he's here, but he's not here. So working to connect those dots to, again, have everyone participate in the largesse of America. I'm also a huge proponent of public-private partnerships. I think smart P3s, particularly in the economic environment in which we're operating right now, where state and local governments are going to see a $1 trillion shortfall over the next year, giving a thoughtful, and they have to be public-private, and sometimes public-private philanthropic partnerships, giving cities and states and local governments, local subdivisions, the opportunity to unlock the capital they have locked up in some of these assets is a huge opportunity that 6 months ago, when folks weren't thinking that UBI, the Mike and his crew, it was real, but now post CARES Act, people, okay, maybe there's something really serious here we should be thinking about. People thought that universal health care, and I'm with Mike, we were on the same team for the presidential election. I'm not a Bernie guy at all, but the discussions around universal health care being unaffordable, unsustainable, even if you put a $1 trillion price tag on it. Well, I'll tell you guys, we're about 3 to 4 trillion in hock right now as we go. So a budget and the way in which we lead is a reflection of our values and the things that we value. So we're going to have to really start thinking very creatively around P3s, around opportunity zones, around UBI, around ways in which we can all win. And if we reimagine everything, well, we can do much better than we have been over the last several years.
I know I said I was going to kick it back to Anthony, but I have one more question before we wrap up. And I'll start it with Mayor Tubbs, but it's because it's a generational question, but it's also just a societal question about, it's sort of going back to what we talked about at the beginning. And I want to leave everybody on an optimistic tone, is that, it feels a little bit different now, the social activism that we've seen and the commitment to change from various parties. I mean, you see something like NASCAR finally coming out and leading from the front on racial issues. And, I'm from North Carolina, Mayor Benjamin, you're in South Carolina. So, these issues are things we're familiar with. But Mayor Tubbs, I'll start with you from a generational perspective. Do you think that millennials, as a result of, racial issues and just the pandemic might have caused some of this as well, do you think millennials are going to be more engaged in the social and political landscape going forward as a result of some of the things we've seen recently, and what impact do you think that's going to have on the country? And then Mayor Benjamin, I want you to follow up just to talk about whether you think this movement that we're feeling right now, you have people like LeBron James, other big athletes and celebrities that are, those groups have always made a push to help with voter rights and things like that, but it seems like there's a more cohesive and energized effort to address those things. We'll start with Mayor Tubbs.
I sure hope so. Because the reason why I got involved with government is because I realized that I'm going to be around to live with a lot of the consequences today, have the decisions to make today in my older years. And I just want to be part of that. I'll be here to deal with the repercussions and the action. So I hope millennials, the Zoomers, and everyone just realizes that no, like we can't wait, that it's on us. And we have to work with those who are older, but we have to be part of this decision-making table, because I just don't want to have to be fighting the same fights in the same way, talking about these same issues 20, 30 years from now. So I think a lot of people feel the same way. And I think particularly if you think of millennials, most of us were born, we were 10, 11 years old when 9/11 happened. We were entering into college or entering into the labor market when the first Great Recession happened in 2008. For many of us, the only two presidents we've known that we voted for are Barack Obama and Donald Trump. We grew up in a time where Oscar Grant, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, every month a new hashtag. We We grew up seeing Colin Kaepernick being blacklisted from the NFL for protesting. So I think that those formative experience hopefully have the impact of getting people involved in the political process and the political system and exerting sort of rights to vote and rights to run for office to kind of get us to where we need to be as a society.
John, I'm encouraged by millennial leadership and the Zoomers as well. As you might be able to deduce from our conversation and banter, Michael and I talk, text, or email almost every day, maybe every other day, and he's representative of a group of friends and leaders, both men and women. Particularly, obviously, we engage with mayors, but amazing leaders in Birmingham, and Jackson, and gosh, in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Shreveport. I mean, just some really talented young leaders who are seeing the world very differently, but also have the wisdom of being, students of history, and we're benefiting from that in a very significant way. I am also excited. We engage with a number of different individuals, including some of the athletes that you mentioned, like LeBron and James and others. I think what's coolest about that is to recognize that, and you guys know, you sit down with a group of athletes, and particularly some African-American athletes, you'll find independents, you'll find Democrats, you'll find Republicans. I mean, to be able to respect the heterogeneity of the group is really cool. You find some who believe strongly in the capital markets, and some, who may be at the other end of the spectrum, but they all seem really at this moment to be focused on human dignity, to be focused on inclusion, to be focused on economic prosperity for communities that have been disenfranchised, to really be focused on making sure that people have the right to the franchise and are able to participate in American elections as one of their constitutional and God-given rights. So that's the exciting time. And I do believe that with the leadership of folks and Michael's generation, I think America is going to be in a better place. I really do.
Well, thank you again, both of you, so much for joining us. Anthony, do you have any final thoughts?
No, well, I want the duck back now. Guys, this guy has like a fake duck. He's been sitting behind him for like the last 7 SALT talks. But when the duck was there, he wasn't talking. Now the duck's not there, and all he's doing is talking. So I sort of want the duck back. But
I had to make sure we asked all the right follow-up questions. It's too interesting and important a conversation.
He thinks he has standing because he's from the South. But listen, guys, you're doing an enormous service to our country, and your public service is exemplary. So on behalf of everybody that listens to these SALT talks and all of our delegates, I just want to personally thank you. You're true patriots, and I know our country is headed for a better place because of men and women like you guys.